Thank you, Rosie. Good afternoon. Welcome to the BBC Asia Network phone-in with me, Nihal. Each and every day, a question for you. Hopefully you'll get involved. I'd very much like to know your opinion on whether you've changed your mind over NATO intervention in Libya. Were those opposed to it wrong? Because Libya's new leadership is meeting world leaders at a conference in Paris today to talk about reconstruction. The National Transitional Council, as they're known, will ask for help on security, rebuilding the country's infrastructure and preparing for democracy. But the NTC still hasn't captured Colonel Gaddafi, whose son, Saif al-Islam, has again vowed a fight to the death. Might possibly get his wish. But are you happy about the West getting involved with the rebuilding of the country? When we discussed the issue during NATO's initial bombing campaign, many of you listened to the BBC Asia Network were opposed to those actions. Now that Gaddafi's regime has all but been overthrown, is it time to change your view? Or do you fear the country will simply launch from one problem to another? And do you believe that the West's intention is motivated by a genuine desire to help, or do they simply have self-interest at heart? Is it all about the oil, or is it about helping the people of Libya have a democratic future? And what's wrong with it being both? Why shouldn't the West get something out of it? After all, that's where you live, and the Libyan people. Or are you just totally against the idea of Western governments intervening in the business of other governments, whether they be Muslim or not? So, if you initially opposed NATO bombing Colonel Gaddafi's forces, do you now feel that you were wrong to have opposed it? Now that you can see the rebels of the National Transitional Council almost being in control of the capital and most of the country, do you feel that it was a good thing that NATO did get involved to help them? Perhaps you didn't want to see a massacre of Libyans in Benghazi that was almost certainly avoided by the fact that NATO planes dropped bombs on Gaddafi's forces. Or do you believe that ultimately this is all about controlling Libya's oil wealth? And any type of gesture that looks like it's helping the Libyan people is in fact a charade, a mirage in the desert. And what's really happening is that the West are trying to carve up those oil revenues for themselves. I'd like to know your opinion. Were those opposed to NATO intervention in Libya wrong? That's the straight headline question, but there's so much that comes from it. Do you get angry? Did you get angry when you saw NATO planes flying over a Muslim country at the time of Eid? Good afternoon, you listen to me, Nihal, on the BBC Asia Network phone-in show dedicated to you and your opinions about events that are going on in the world or events that perhaps are very personal to you. Today, I'm asking the question, were those opposed to NATO intervention in Libya wrong? World leaders are meeting in Paris today in order to discuss how they can help Libya's new leadership. They'll need assistance with security, rebuilding the country's infrastructure, and, of course, preparing for democracy. But do you support Western intervention there? When we discussed the issue of NATO bombing during the initial stages, many of you were opposed to it. Now that we've seen Gaddafi's regime all but overthrown, is it time for a change of opinion? It's widely accepted that the Libyan people who rose up against Gaddafi wouldn't have been so successful without the help of NATO air power. So should we give credit to NATO for its intervention, or are one set of problems simply being replaced by another? Do you believe that Western powers were there to make sure that civilians weren't killed, or was it merely part of a longer plan to ensure control of Libya's vast oil supplies, something like 1.3 million barrels a day? Let's speak to Dr. Arif Ali Naid, who's the operations manager of the Libyan stabilisation team and the Libyan ambassador to the UAE, who is actually on his way to the conference. Dr. Naid, very good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, sir.
Were those opposed to NATO intervention, and there were many people who were, certainly many listeners to the BBC Asia Network were they wrong?
Well, I wouldn't put it so bluntly. We must respect people's opinions. I'm sure that whatever people's opinions was, they did have grounds, and the way they looked at the matter must have influenced their outlook.
Of course.
But however, I do believe that it was right for NATO to intervene, and I am actually quite glad that they did intervene. Had they not intervened, Libyans would have been slaughtered in the tens of thousands, not only in Benghazi but also in Misrata, Jabal Nafusa, and many other places. So I believe that overall this intervention was not only right, but it was successful. And the due diligence that NATO actually committed to and exercised in avoiding civilian casualties has resulted in a very low number of casualties. Of course, all those casualties are regrettable, and we feel very sorry for them. However, I believe that it was an amazingly successful campaign to protect tens of thousands of civilians.
Those in the West and elsewhere who believe that this wasn't about wholly protecting civilians, it was about making sure that the supply of oil stayed steady and also ensuring that in the future the West get their hands on that oil. What would you say to those people who feel that way?
Well, I think it's quite unfair, actually, to accuse people of bad intent. I believe that from the meetings I've had with so many leaders who were involved in this, I believe that they were sincerely trying to protect civilians, and I very much respect the effort that they made, and I think many Libyans share this appreciation and this feeling. Yes, there are of course economic interests in the world, and these are part of the vital lives of Westerners and Easterners, and both of Libyans and the international community. And we have now a win-win situation of a population that is in good relations and appreciates the effort made by international partners. And we will work together with international partners through such conferences as the one in Paris and the previous one in Istanbul, the previous one in Doha, and the others, in order to achieve a new way of dealing with each other that is based on mutual compassion, respect, and mutual cooperation.
Dr. Knight, what are the barriers to ensuring that Libya's wealth benefits Libya's people?
Sorry, can you repeat?
What are the barriers to ensuring that Libya's wealth benefits Libya's people?
Number one is that the stabilization effort and the entire structure of governance and of the post-conflict situation is not only Libyan-led, but is thoroughly Libyan. We have hundreds of young Libyans who are ensuring that not only do they stabilize the country, but they do it through Libyan visions and Libyan eyes and efforts. Yes, we will and are already getting international help in all aspects and all sectors, but it is very much Libyan-led and devoted to the love of Libya and Libyans.
From, I suppose, certain Western governments' point of view, the worst-case scenario is Islamists managing to get involved in this process and destabilise the country. How can the Libyan people and people such as yourself in positions of authority ensure that that won't happen?
Well, what I can tell you is that the ultimate guarantees for stability in Libya are the Libyan people themselves, and the millions of Libyans who have sincerely and honestly fought for their freedom are not going to give it up for any tyrannical move, be that Islamist or otherwise. Libyans are genuinely interested in a democratic and free country, and it is the collective will of the Libyan people and the community that is already in the streets celebrating the victory and looking forward to building a beautiful country that's in peace with the rest of humanity. That is the ultimate insurance policy against any trends that may be destructive to world peace.
Dr. Knight, one of our listeners has just texted in and said it's all about oil. The West is using this to change the Middle East. The rebels have destroyed the country. I'm not in favour of Gaddafi, but this is not a solution. What would you say to that person who's just texted in, Dr. Knight, considering you are now going to be at the heart of the process to try and take Libya to a place it's never been before?
Well, it is the Libyan people, and especially the young people of Libya, who are taking Libya into a new horizon of peace, mutual compassion, constructive work to rebuilding our country after 42 years of devastation. I believe that it is very important not to be cynical of the aspirations and the efforts of young Libyan people, and people should be given the benefit of doubt and should be supported.
Well, they're cynical of Western intentions. They're not cynical of the strength and power of the Libyan youth. They are cynical about, this text is clearly cynical about Western intentions. Now, what do you have in place to ensure that your country and the wealth of your country...
I can genuinely tell you that the Western leaders that I've met and the international community leaders that I've met, including UN officials and NGOs and many other people, what I can say is that I really deeply felt that there was a heartfelt sincerity towards helping us, and I believe they are intended on helping the Libyan people. And the Libyan people are not naive. If there are any insincerity or insincere moves, they will protect themselves against them through an engagement that is neither naive nor suspicious. I think that it is very important not to be paranoid and not to believe in conspiracy theories, but to look forward with sincerity and optimism, and to build together a new way of being. Libya is the only place, I think, in the region where dozens of foreign flags are flown in the squares of freedom with pride and sincerity. And I believe it will be a lighthouse for the whole region of dealing with equality and reciprocal respect with the rest of humanity.
Interesting, you mentioned young people many times, Dr. Naid. Experience tells us that it tends to be the old guard that takes over. There are going to be billions of dollars flowing into Libya. Isn't it going to be difficult for the old guard to let go of that? And how involved really are the young people going to be?
Well, I can tell you this, that of the 70 or so people who are involved in the stabilization team, I'm the oldest, and I'm about, 47. And the people in my generation are only 5, I think. The rest of them are in their 20s and 30s, and they include women and men. And this is the case in all the ministries and the parts of the executive team that I'm working with. I believe that it is the young people who will determine the future of this country. I believe that the older generations fully respect the young people's effort and their great sacrifice to free this country. And I don't think that that my generation or older generations will sell the young people short. We will be at their service. And will continue to do so, and unless they would like us to move on. I myself will leave it up to my young team to determine whether I will be helpful to them in the months to come or not.
Dr. Naid, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, and good luck on your mission today. You certainly will need it. Let's speak to Nabila Ramdani. 81869 is the text number. Are you paranoid, believing in conspiracy theories, if you think that it's all about oil? That's what my previous guest, Dr. Naid, said. Paranoia and conspiracy theories, that the West is sincere in its wish to help the Libyan people. It's not about oil. Nabila Ramdani is a journalist who specialises in Arab affairs. Very good afternoon to you, Nabila.
Good afternoon.
Well, you heard what Dr. Naid had to say. Paranoia and conspiracy theories from people who believe it's all about oil. Also, he was very complimentary about NATO's involvement. What do you think?
Well, I don't think, it's not about perceptions or being paranoid. It's about dealing with facts. And there is no doubt that what underpinned and what drove the military intervention in Libya is a rush for oil and other energy supplies.
Not a city of 1 million people, Benghazi, which could have been razed to the ground and hundreds of thousands of people killed. That had nothing to do with it.
Let's put things in context. As we all know, it's very much, the French President Sarkozy, which initially drove, and the military action and pushed for military action in Libya.
Yeah.
If we go back to the last Christmas holiday only, we had 4 members of the French government spending their holiday with dictators in the Middle East. The ex-foreign ministry was holidaying with Ben Ali in Tunisia. The Prime Minister François Fillon was spending his Christmas holiday with his entire family, including his 5 children, with the Mubaraks in Egypt. President Sarkozy and his wife were staying with the King of Morocco. And I think it's fair to say that they were not there to gather intelligence to topple those governments. And when, in fact, pro-democracy demonstrations started in Egypt and indeed in Tunisia, the French, now ex-foreign ministry, made an infamous speech in Parliament to provide not only financial but military support, not to the pro-democracy groups, but to the dictators in place. So there are very strong reasons to believe that the military intervention in Libya was not driven on humanitarian grounds, but purely, the huge the vast resources in oil and natural gas in Libya makes the military intervention worthwhile. It's very, very obvious, and it's no coincidence that while the conflict was unfolding, the National Transitional Council was already negotiating deals with oil companies like Shell and Total, and as you mentioned in your introduction, today a meeting is held in Paris to discuss, business deals, business interests, and the Interim Council has already pledged, to reward all those who took a lead role in backing the rebellion. So it's abundantly clear what this war was all about.
Well, I suppose rewarding people who helped to topple the dictatorship of Colonel Gaddafi probably makes some sense, as long as, of course, those rewards ultimately benefit the Libyan people as well as the businesses involved. As Dr. Nihal has already said, do not believe that the Libyan people are so naive that they would be led down a garden path by Western powers and sell off the family silver, as it were. What would you say to that?
Well, I would, re-emphasize the fact that the double-standard approach of the West in relation to unrest in the Middle East and indeed North Africa was very blatant. If you look at the Syrian experience, for example, we have a regime which is day in, day out, indiscriminately killing, men, women, children, torturing people, imprisoning people, and nothing is being
But Nabila, often, isn't it, the governments of the West say, just because we can't do it in every country, it doesn't mean we shouldn't do it in one country. And that's a fairly logical argument, is it not?
No, but what the double-standard approach suggests is that strategic and economic consideration are far more important to the West than the basic support for democracy. I go back to my point.
No, but that doesn't answer the point, does it? That just because we can't do it in every country, it doesn't mean we shouldn't do it in any country. The fact that we can help where we can help, and of course there are strategic interests in that's the job of states, is it not? To further their own aims and their strategic goals. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't help when it looks like Colonel Gaddafi's forces are going to butcher people in Benghazi, that you shouldn't do something about it. I mean, could it not be the case that Western governments didn't want another Srebrenica on their hands and they wanted to do something about it?
Well, that's a fair point to make, but I go back to my initial point as to the attitude of the French government, for example, not supporting pro-democracy group, and we've seen also how Britain and indeed the US send mixed messages as to...
But that was important, was it not, Nabila, that the West couldn't be seen to be instigating it, because that's the whole problem with regime change. This wasn't about regime change from without, it was about regime change from within. So the fact that just a month or so before it all kicked off they were all staying at their houses doesn't necessarily show double standards. It just shows that it changed on the ground. They weren't going to go there in November or December and suddenly start trying to undermine the fabric of Libyan society or indeed Tunisian society. That had to come from within. And aren't they kind of damned if they do and damned if they don't in that respect? Because the last thing you would have wanted them to do, presumably, is to try and destabilise the country before the people themselves had made that choice.
very much so, and it's crucial that, change comes from within. But you can't say that, for example, when you have the Prime Minister of this country, David Cameron, saying in one breath that it's not about regime change, but Gaddafi must go, then the end game is very, very clear. And there's also their idea...
but it's who instigates the regime change, is it not? Because you, as a specialist in Arab affairs, know how damaging it was for the West when they instigated regime change in Iraq and, of course, in Afghanistan.
Absolutely, but I think there's a crucial difference to make between, as you said, avoiding a potential slaughter on the people of Benghazi, as was the fear at the time when Gaddafi forces, were advancing in a pretty daunting manner and pledging to quell a rebellion in a most brutal way, and indeed taking sides with, a rebellion. And there's absolutely no doubt that it was NATO's war as opposed to, the rebels' war. Avoiding a potential onslaught is one thing, but taking sides, backing up the rebels and making it NATO's mission to lead them to outright victory by providing them with all sorts of financial, logistical support, including arms, in clear breach of UN resolution on arms embargo, and also an open check to the rebels, all sorts of intelligence, covert, special operations on the ground. That is not what NATO's mission should have been about.
But it did help avoid the killing of civilians, did it not? I mean, as Dr. Nihal pointed out, throughout the bombing, very, very few Libyan civilians were killed by that NATO bullying. But just wait there a second.
If I may,
yes, of course.
It's a very controversial point that you're making here, because it's.
I'm just quoting what Dr. Nihal said. Yes.
Yeah, I mean it's questionable about whether or not NATO did avoid,
not wholly avoid, but considering the amount of bombs that they dropped, the precision.
If we look at the situation now, how many people have been killed and died in the wake of NATO's involvement? NATO has not only killed innocent civilians in the wake of their intervention, including rebels, Gaddafi loyalist forces, which are, let's not forget, fighting under duress for a very nasty regime. They have a responsibility now, especially when the battle for Sirte is on the way, to protect civilians. There's, of course, thousands of people who will be caught in a bitter fighting, and they need to be protected by NATO. If NATO's, motivation is truly and genuinely about the protection of civilian lives, then the reason why we do not have clear figures and transparent figures about the number of casualties is also because NATO not only started the war, intensified it, and put the country into a very murky situation.
OK, Nabila, let me just stop you there for a second. I want to bring Nouman Ben-Othman in, who is from the think tank Quilliam. He was also the former head of the Libyan militant organisation known as the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, which aimed to overthrow Gaddafi. But I really want to know from you, and what's interesting is that when we first did this phone-in, so many people were against this, and so many people were saying it's all about oil, like this anonymous texter. Has your opinion changed? Or do you agree with Nabila that it is ultimately about business? It's not about humanitarian assistance to the Libyan people. It's not about trying to instill democracy into a nation that has never seen it. It is all about oil. Do you still believe that, or has your opinion changed? The fact that the rebels could not have overthrown Gaddafi without NATO help means that it was essential, and that NATO helped Libya become a democratic country. Or is it only that the West helped Libya help them to get hold of Libya's oil? Nouman Ben-Othman, good afternoon to you, my friend. Thank you for joining us. What do you make of Nabila's assessment and analysis of NATO intentions in Libya?
With all due respect to Nabila's point of view, I completely disagree with her.
No, man, sorry. Let me just stop you there. We're going to try and get you on a cleaner line because I really want people to be able to hear what you're saying, and I'm quite surprised you're on the line. It's such a terrible line. We will come back to you. I want to hear from you, though. 81869 in the text number. Were you wrong? Are you still fundamentally in your heart, you cannot allow yourself to think of the NATO intervention in Libya as a good thing? Or have you changed your mind? Do you still think it's all about the oil? Or do you believe that actually, considering we just spoke to someone very much at the heart of the Libyan struggle for democracy, who believes that NATO's intentions were humanitarian and it wasn't about carving up the oil? What do you think? Is it about business? Or is it about saving the Libyan people? 81869 on the text. Email nihal@bbc.co.uk. Or give me a call. Tell me 08459 440 445. I know that you're very passionate about this, especially if you're a Muslim. This is a time of year. It's just Eid. And you're thinking about your religion. You're thinking about the West's history in that region, especially recent history, and it makes you angry every time you hear about Western intervention or Western planes. But what about now? Is it different? Have you changed your mind? Or do you still feel exactly as you did before? Noman Benotman is back with us, hopefully on a much clearer line. Noman, hello.
Yeah, hello.
Hooray, crystal clear, brilliant. Noman, what did you make of Nabila's analysis of NATO involvement in the region?
Yeah, as I mentioned, it's with all due respect to Nabila's point of view, which is I think completely she entitled to express her point of view, but myself, I think I'm holding a different understanding of the situation. And just let me clarify, this issue has to do with oil, because I think everybody now starts to talk about oil as the main motive, behind NATO action in Libya.
1.3 million barrels a day.
Yeah, even if it's 3 million per a day, which we'll be aiming for, maybe by 2015. But the point is, that during Colonel Gaddafi's regime, period, for 42 years, who is benefiting from Libya's oil? This is my question, Well,
it was him, presumably, wasn't it?
No, him as the revenue. But who is getting the oil? It's being sold to who? Who is the main companies, Western companies working to Libya to help the Libyans to make sense or to make good use of their own oil. We can't ourselves as the Libyans to take care of all this industry. It's as simple as that. So we need the help from the West to help us utilizing our natural resource, which is the Western companies. This is the story since Libya established as an independent state, and in the 65, I think, or maybe 64, when we find out our country is oil-rich country, this is the case. So it's, I think, a huge mistake here, and we are misleading the public opinion if we said now the freedom fighters or the rebels, as they've been called in the media, they're going to change the course, and this is the first time Western companies are going to benefit from Libyan's oil. Excuse me, this is not the story. This is the story since 60 years ago. So please, we need to forget about it. Then the second issue is, what's wrong? What's wrong with the Libyans if we decide to establish very good relations and with a mutual benefit for us as the Libyans and well-known advanced Western companies in this industry, the oil and gas industry? What is wrong with it?
Okay, no, man, stop there a second. Wait a minute. I think that's a valid question to ask Nabila. Nabila, as Norman points out, what's wrong with it? What's wrong with Libyan companies wanting to do business with the West and mutually beneficial? I mean, they're not children, the Libyans, are they? They're not just going to get taken to the cleaners by these flashy Western companies in their flash suits with their highfalutin language, are they?
Well, absolutely. I think if it's a win-win situation, why not? That's what business is all about. But what is questionable is, this idea that the West was driven by humanitarian instincts, and they are now ending up doing business with the NTC, the National Transitional Council. I think one should pay very, very close attention to who the National Transitional Council is. And as far as I'm concerned, all I can see is it comprises, a vast array of individuals with completely conflicting political, ideological interests. And if we focus on the leadership of the National Transitional Council, because we don't know, who are the other members, but as far as the leadership is concerned, they are all members of Gaddafi's old guard. They have very strong ties with the old regime. the number one of the NTC, has only switched sides in February when things started to go wrong. So that is what I'm questioning, and there is clearly, a lack of coordination. There is a lack of unity among the National Transitional Council itself and rebel forces on the ground. On last Monday in Misrata, we've seen already the first demonstration happening there, with more than 500 Libyans demonstrating against the appointment of a former Gaddafi general, Shkal, who was appointed head of the security in Tripoli, in the capital city. So this. But
Nabila, sorry, isn't that, just to interrupt you a second, isn't that an interesting point, though, that unlike in Iraq, where the security structure was just taken away overnight and the ensuing chaos that came from that, there is some idea about making sure that doesn't happen by looking at people who, yes, may have been part of the regime, but also will have knowledge and experience in certain ways. And if that knowledge and experience can be used to benefit the Libyan people, then why should it not be?
I think the whole point of getting rid of Gaddafi, it has to be put in the context of the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring is all about the end of dictatorship.
But look what happened in Iraq, where the security apparatus was dismantled overnight, wholly, and look what happened. There was a vacuum, there was chaos, there was the kind of fighting, massacring of Sunni and Shia between themselves that nobody wants to see happen, because, as you well know, Nabila, you're far more knowledgeable about this than I, there are competing tribes and different agendas that go on in Libya, like they do in every country.
Absolutely, and for example, one aspect that it's not discussed much is the role of the Islamists. What role are they going to play in the new, government?
Well, I asked Dr. Nayad that. I asked him that, and he said that the Libyan people themselves have no wish to replace one dictator with another one.
Well, they are clearly the most organised group, the most heavily armed. They are said to be behind the killing of the commander Abdel Fattah Yunus,
yes,
who defected to join Gaddafi's ranks, to join the rebels, and was killed a few weeks ago. And at the core, at the heart of the new draft constitution of the NTC is indeed Sharia law, which is a compromise to the Islamists, because of course they would want to have a share in this new government, and that is, problematic.
Okay. Sorry, just Noman, do you see the same things that Nabila is saying, that this NTC, we don't know who they are, we don't know what they are, we don't know how this is going to end up?
No. First of all, just please, I need you to give me time to explain. I think many issues. First of all, we know who they are, of course. You know why? Because we are Libyans. So we know exactly who they are, the NTC members. Then the second issue, I think, again and again, we keep addressing the issue from a different and wrong perspective or context. This is not the NTC initiative or the NTC revolution against Gaddafi is dictatorship. This is the Libyan people. This is the Libyan revolution led by the youth, mainly starts in Benghazi, against Gaddafi's regime, to put an end to a 42 years of Gaddafi's rule, with his family in Libya. Then the NTC, it's been formed, when the revolution took place, and start to gather momentum, because we need to keep the country together. And that was the main war and the main goal for the NTC, not to rule, not to govern nobody, because it was a war. The NTC played a magnificent role, exceptional role, to keep Libya as one state. So that means for everybody, our home still there. We are still Libyans. Libya still there. This is very important here, because it's a Libya revolution, not the NTC. Then the second issue is, there is no single company here, or we talk about deals with the NTC. The NTC role now, when we managed to kick Gaddafi out of Tripoli, is just to pave the way for elected democratic government, and to establish a real multi-party democratic system in Libya. this is the role of the MTC. I think it's really, really big mistake. And I myself, I feel sorry, you know, after all these sacrifices to try to address it as if it's like certain people form a political party, which is not. It's a very loose coalition from well-respected key individuals within the Libyan society. And by the way, none of them, I'm saying I'm a Libyan, and I'm here to answer every single question. None of the members of the NTC, he was at one day a member of hardcore Colin Gaddafi's regime.
What about Islamists? No, man. What about them being Islamists?
The Justice Minister, the number one of the
Justice, Mr. Jalil, I think he is the most popular person now in Libya because he's never ever in his life been at the hardcore of Colin Gaddafi's regime. He was a reformist. He was brought to Libya, to the government, by Saif al-Islam's initiative, you know, when he started in 2005, then 2007, including Dr. Mahmoud Jibril, to try, at least, you know, to get rid of the presence and the influence of the hardcore ideological...
Okay, let's look. We don't have time to go through each individual in the NTC. Noman, but wait there, one second. Noman, I want to bring Tom in Watford in, who's called in. 08459 440 445 is the number. If you were against NATO intervention in Libya when it began, A, have you changed your mind? B, would you admit you were wrong? Or C, do you stick to your guns and say, actually, I was right, this is all about oil? Tom in Watford, good afternoon.
Hello there, Nihal.
Good to speak to you again, Tom.
And you.
I know you always weigh in on the heavy subjects. You tend to ignore some of the subjects we do, but I know when I do something like this, you're going to be on the phone. Now, Tom, what do you think?
Well, I think that, firstly, I disagree with much of what Nabila says, and the other gentleman I do fully support. Firstly, on this conference that's taking place in Paris today, there are over 60 nations taking part. Amongst those nations taking part are the Russians and the Chinese, hardly supporters of the NTC and the Libyan revolution.
No,
so this isn't about carving up oil contracts. This is about much more sort of mundane establishment things.
It should be noted, though, that it's jointly hosted by France and Britain, which are, of course, the two hawks in this military adventure.
Well, you call
that's not an anecdotal point to make.
Yeah, you call them hawks, but you see, I think your hatred of the West, and I use that term very advisedly, I've seen you on TV and so on, I think your hatred of the West blinds you to the fact that Libyans, ordinary Libyans, wanted some freedom. You say that, well, the NTC...
Very misguided if you think I hate the West.
I do think so.
I'm a product of the West. I was born and educated in the West.
That doesn't stop you from hating them.
No,
and
it doesn't stop me from having a very rational and...
Well, I don't know that you are rational. You see, you're looking at the negative of all of this. You're saying, oh, the NTC are made up of this, they're made up of that.
Well, I'm looking at facts.
Well, no, you keep saying you're looking at
one
facts.
of the things I said, which is not right. I'm
saying you're looking at facts.
Everything I say is factually accurate. If you want.
No.
Okay, well, we'll bring Norman back. Norman.
Yeah, that's it. I can answer every single specific question just by Nabila. Just give me one single name, you know, within the NTC. And I'm as a Libyan. I work very close, you know, in Libya, especially during the...
Okay, Norman. Let Nabila do that. Nabila, name to us one...
Within the NTC, who is?
Well, we just kind of covered that, didn't you? Because, Nabila, you felt the Justice Minister under Gaddafi was someone...
No, he's not. Please, give me a moment, please, to explain this.
Well, you did explain it. No, you did explain it. You did explain that he was very well loved in Libya and that he was a reformist. You had a chance to explain it.
Give me 30 seconds to say, Mr. Jalil, he is the first minister ever, while he is in his position serving as a minister, challenged Colin Gaddafi in 2007 in public.
Okay, Norman. Nabila, you need to come back on that because Norman has said that the person that you mentioned, in fact, the impression that you're giving of this person as being a hardcore Gaddafi loyalist is not true.
It's not true.
I think Norman was quite right to say that, you know, all the people involved are Libyans. And that's the only common point they have, in the sense that the rebellion was driven by... the people behind the rebellion were driven by one thing, the hatred, the legitimate hatred of Gaddafi because of...
And that unified them?
That unified them, very much so.
No,
but
I disagree.
Beyond that, we are already...
Wait a minute, Norman, just let Nabila finish her point. I promise I'll bring you back in. Nabila, finish your point, and I'll get back to Norman because he wants to jump in. Nabila.
I'm just highlighting the conflicting political and ideological interests within the NTC. For example, in my opinion, it's highly controversial to appoint Al-Barani Shkel, a former Gaddafi general, as head of security in Tripoli. And I'm not the only one who find that a bit strange, because more than 500 Libyans have demonstrated massively against that appointment in Misrata. And what we are seeing is that when the rebellion started in the east, it was driven by people in Benghazi initially. Now, the rebel forces in the west have done the most decisive contribution to this conflict in helping secure the city of Tripoli, the capital city. And they're already claiming that they should therefore be in charge of the country. The Islamists are already...
Sorry, Nabila, I just want to correct you, because... Yes, of course, there are problems, there are people with conflicts. I mean, that's a given, of course. They're made up, as any grouping of people are. They're going to have different agendas and different issues. The point being, though, is that they are all working towards a common goal, are they not? And that is securing the future of Libya, are they not? None of them are working towards destroying Libya, are they?
Well, clearly they're not working together because, as I said, there are several and different factions within the rebel group, which is not a homogeneous entity, which do not have the same vision for the future of Libya. They do not want to work together. It's a patchwork of factions which are effectively vying for control of oil revenues, vying for control of...
All you're really saying is they're a broad church. Yeah, they are a broad church, like virtually every movement, every grouping anywhere. They're a broad church. So what? The point here is that they're aiming to produce a democratic state in which every competing section will have to be subject to a democratic constitution which people vote on. That's the whole
warning against is that the NTC should do everything it possibly could not to be simply a puppet of the West, and that's very much how some of the rebel factions on the ground are seeing the NTC.
Well, yeah, but that's not true, is it? Because if you take a look at... You say, oh, well, this is all about oil. Do you think the West... Do you think we couldn't do a deal with Gaddafi? Of course we could. That's what we've been doing for years.
He did a deal with Gaddafi. Tony Blair embraced Gaddafi.
Yes, so we're quite. Yes. So we don't need to get rid of Gaddafi in order to do a deal for oil. We were doing deals for oil all along.
Previously you were doing deals for oil on Gaddafi's terms. That's the main difference.
Oh, but wait a minute. Sorry. Implicit in what you've just said is, and this is what Dr. Nihal pointed out before, was that he would rather people didn't believe that the Libyan people were naive enough to just fall for whatever these flashy Westerners tell them.
Right.
Yes.
That was his point. It was, we're not going to just fall for it.
Absolutely. I think you're right. The Libyan people are no fools. They know exactly what their country is worth.
So what's the problem then? They know that. The Libyans aren't stupid. They're one of the most highly educated, as I understand.
Of course. They have the highest literacy rates in North Africa.
Right. So they're not stupid.
Technically skilled, especially in engineering and petroleum industries.
Right.
The danger is that the foreign contractors pour in. While the biggest problem in the Arab world today is young, idle men. And dare I say, in the case of Libya, we have young men with, heavily armed. The West armed them to the teeth.
Oh, no, let me just stop you there.
Okay.
I often hear this argument.
Okay, good guys. I think we're going to have...
in Benghazi.
Okay.
Just take a look
Tom,
at the investment.
Bargain over buying an AK-47.
Hang on, just before you go...
Nabila, 1 second. Tom, go on. Last point, Tom.
Yeah, last point. This idea that the West armed them to the teeth. Just go and have a look at the battlefield inventory. It's not Western weapons. They're Russian. They're Chinese. They're North Korean. Just go and have a look at the tanks. Yes, we provided...
The French did arm the rebels, Tom. The French government did arm the rebels.
The rebels they did, Nihal, but before that, what I'm talking about is this idea that, we armed these regimes up to the teeth. No, we didn't. We didn't arm Iraq up to the teeth. It was the Russians. It was... the Chinese, it was the North Koreans. Just go and have a look at...
Well, I think everybody was complicit in that, but, that's the business involved. Tom, thank you very much. Let's speak to Anjem Tahikeli, who's Chief Executive of Basic Human Rights Charity and has been to Libya. Anjem, good afternoon.
Hi, hello.
And now you've heard Nabila and Tom, of course, and Nouman making their points about Libya. What I'd like to ask you is, do you think that those people who continue to oppose NATO intervention in Libya and originally opposed it, were those people wrong? This idea that actually Western intervention in Libya is all about oil and not really anything to do with humanitarian concerns, what do you make of that argument?
Well, first of all, trade it goes both ways. And the oil can't all be consumed by the Libyans. What you need is a stable government where resources are redistributed so that the country makes its savings and they're able to reinvest. Secondly, let me tell you, when I was in Benghazi in March, that was the masses wanted the NATO intervention. The local people themselves were not equal to the power of Gaddafi. And the willingness and the sacrifice of the lives and limbs, we've got to say that the credit goes to the people of Libya for the success of today. However, they're nowhere near rebuilding of Libya, where we see the internet, where, as a humanitarian organisation, you see international intervention, is to ensure that the National Transitional Council, and we've got to remember it's an interim council, and there is a vacuum that will be left of security, army, police and a justice system. And the international community, that's not just Britain alone, France, that's Russia, China, have to ensure that accountability and is upheld.
Right.
And as a civil society, which is where we fall into the humanitarian angle of this, is raising the capacity of the local people to ensure that they run their country. What saddens me is the fact that, this phone call, and it's fantastic to have a healthy debate, but right now the Libyan people need the support of the international community and organisations such as ours. So
which is what is happening today, is it? Depending on whether you think that it's actually all those 60 nations are meeting together to help Libya, or they're meeting there to carve Libya up.
Well, look, everybody has their agendas. Everybody will have their agendas. As long as the government, the government of Libya, or the International Council, are there to govern and serve the needs of the people. And something that Nabila said struck me, that if you take this right back to February, when the people were rising up, and I remember going around so many families saying, we will sacrifice what it is now for freedom. Right. Well, she said something that really touched me, and she said, in Misrata there was a demonstration about with regards to the appointment of the individual. Well, at least they were able to demonstrate, right? Did anybody come out and start shooting them? Were they taken in human rights violations against them?
Nabila is not at any point saying that Libya was a better place with Gaddafi.
No,
the point is then what she worries about looking forward is whether this NTC that the West is buying into is actually all it claims to be, or all it seems to be, and whether backing the NTC is storing up trouble for the future. Nabila, I don't wish to speak for you, but is that essentially what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
I've interviewed Gaddafi in the past, and I have written extremely critically about the regime, so that there's no question about me saying for a split second that the Gaddafi regime was anything but a despotic rule for over 4 decades, and that's, an appalling legacy.
But who else does sorry to interrupt you, but who else does the West have to talk to, Nabila? Who else can they deal with? They haven't got anyone else to deal with but the NTC, do they not? They have to deal with someone to help them. They have to release the funds to somebody, don't they?
Well, at the end, absolutely. The NTC was, put together by President Sarkozy, very quickly, because.
But it's still what they have, Nabila. It's what they have, and it's what you have to have a dialogue.
Yeah, what you
highlighted. Representative.
Wait, you can't speak at the same time. Sorry, just let Andrew finish her point, Nabila. I'll bring you back in.
And
Andrew.
the representative of the people. Without dialogue, there's no peace. Okay, but they're there to represent the people. And as Noman was saying earlier, a democratically elected government is the way forward. So what the international community have to do, Nabila, and I'm sure you'll agree with me, is to ensure that it's a representative of the masses until there's a government in place.
I think that's the crucial point here, and I would agree with that. And the problem with the NTC at the moment is that it is not representative of the Libyan population.
So who have they got?
It is an elected body, with massively disorganized, with differences between them, and that's the big challenge ahead. And you've highlighted some of the other major challenges ahead.
Can I just come across you there, just for 1 second? I was in Haiti.
Wait, Anjum, let Nabila finish. Just let her finish. Nabila?
What will be crucial to all this is security. The Western powers will be desperate to prove they can avoid another Iraq, and stability will not just be crucial for the spread of democracy, but to make sure that the country is a safe place for people.
Okay, Nabila, let me just stop you there. Anjum?
Yeah, isn't there a danger then? Because I go back to, I was in Haiti, and one of the issues of all of that aid and help, because there wasn't a government to go through, a sovereign government, everybody was doing what they were doing. Don't you not have to have a central point, albeit if it's not exactly what you want to have? I know the dangers and everything that you're highlighting, what can happen, but it's what you've got to create a dialogue with. And the NTC are there, and that's what you've got right now.
Okay, Nabila, can I just stop you there for a second? I want to bring Neil in, who's got in contact with us. Before that, though, Hami has said, "Hi, Nihal," on the text. "The UK involvement is a lot about revenge for Lockerbie and embassy shootings. Gaddafi should have remained in power to keep the country stable and prosperous. They had the best infrastructure, schools, hospitals in North Africa. Democracy? What a joke. The UK has plenty of problems. Riots and uprising earlier this month. The rebels just want to get their greedy paws on Libyan wealth. The lady speaker you have on is 100% correct." Talking about you, Nabila, but I can imagine you almost entirely disagree with what Hami has just said on the Nabila. I can imagine you. It's interesting that Hami believes that agrees with 100% that you've said, but reading out Hami's text, you would disagree with almost all of that, I would have thought.
Absolutely. I think democracy is not one should never compromise over democracy and fundamental human rights, however egalitarian or however well off the Libyan people were under Gaddafi. It is correct, though, that the Libyan people were better off than most people in the Middle East and North Africa for all sorts of reasons. For example, the use of electricity and water was free for domestic. Water and electricity, for example, were free for domestic use. People are not paying tax. They get huge stipends to go and study abroad. They've got all sorts of advantages, but that doesn't substitute for, a democratic arena.
Well, it's interesting.
Environment.
But it's interesting, is it not, that a lot of people are saying that this revolution, these people who are driving it, are the young of Libya. So if they had all those things, clearly the one thing that they really wanted above all things was democracy and freedom, and they felt that perhaps some of those things that you mentioned were worth sacrificing for the right to vote and the right to have a choice over their future.
No, absolutely, and that's absolutely legitimate. And these young people who took part in the rebellion have to be commended for challenging a very nasty regime. There's no question about that.
Okay.
But they should do it alone.
Okay, Neil, good afternoon.
Hello, good afternoon, Nihal.
Sorry to have kept you waiting, Neil. What would you like to say?
It's just, when we objected to NATO intervention in Libya, it wasn't about why they are intervening, because obviously it is always the duty of a democratic civil society to intervene in a dictatorship. But surely there should be some objective criteria which they should apply when they are intervening in another, in an international situation. What was happening in Libya has been going on for decades in Tibet, in Sri Lanka, in Burma. Why does NATO feel that it is not the duty of them to intervene in those situations and only in Libya?
Right.
That was the objection.
Right.
We didn't object because NATO was intervening. We just wanted to know what the criteria was for intervention.
Well, what about the defence that just because we can't do it everywhere, it doesn't mean we shouldn't do it somewhere?
Well, that is not a defence. Then you should have some objective criteria which you apply.
Okay, none of the places that you were talking about, or none of the places that were mentioned, I mean, I've got a text here that says, from Khan, oil, that's what the West is after in Libya. I don't see anyone rushing to free the people of Zimbabwe. Oh, I forgot Zimbabwe has no oil. But the people of Harare, I mean, I was in Zimbabwe a couple of years ago. The people of Harare were not faced with the kind of military onslaught that Gaddafi was going to impose on Benghazi.
Nihal, you know that the kind of situation that the Libyans faced with Gaddafi, he hadn't carried it out. But what was going on in Sri Lanka and what was going on in Tibet has been going on for decades. They are actually systematically annihilating, the Tibetans and
Well, I'm not sure Sri Lanka's comparable. I mean, obviously, as you can understand, I know quite a lot about the situation in Sri Lanka. I go there every year. I'm not sure it's comparable. Is it in the sense that this was an Arab Spring joined by the majority, it seemed, of the Libyan people who wished to be rid of Gaddafi? What you're talking about in Sri Lanka was very different to that. So let's take it away from other parts of the world. But I mean, you're talking about the Libyan people wished rid of Gaddafi, the majority of them.
And you don't think that NATO should have intervened when there was a blatant invasion of Tibet by China? This was a separate sovereign country that they invaded and just took over, and they're systematically destroying the culture and the people over there.
Okay, Nihal, thank you very much indeed. Nabila and Anjum, thank you very much for joining us as well.